The champagne flute chimed, a bright, cheerful sound in a room that suddenly felt ice cold. My daughter-in-law, Tiffany, beamed at a crowd of strangers in the new house, the house my husband's life savings had just paid for. "And I have to give a huge thank you," she announced, raising her glass to me, "to Kevin's mom, our primary investor, for providing the seed capital to make this flip happen." Investor, seed capital, flip. The words didn't just sting, they reclassified our entire relationship. In that instant, standing under the cold glare of the modern track lighting, I wasn't a mother, I was a transaction. But that public humiliation wasn't a sudden betrayal. It was just the final crack in a foundation that had been crumbling for years. And the first hairline fracture in that foundation appeared 2 weeks before the party, in a place my late husband Frank would have hated. It was a cold, quiet office on the 12th floor of a downtown skyscraper, one of those places where money isn't something you earn with sawdust on your jeans and calluses on your hands, but something that moves silently behind glass and polished mahogany. I sat across from a man named Mr. Davis, a kind but detached financial advisor who looked young enough to be my own son. Between us, on the vast, empty expanse of his desk, sat a single stack of papers and a heavy, expensive-looking pen. It felt less like a pen and more like a gavel, waiting to pass a final sentence on my future. "So, Carol," Mr. Davis said, his voice a soft, professional hum. "This document authorizes the full liquidation of the annuity account. As we discussed, the market value is strong, but cashing out the entire principal is a significant move. It will leave your portfolio with very little cushion for emergencies." He was being polite. What he meant was, it would leave me with no cushion. That annuity was Frank's final project. It was the last thing he built for me. I could still remember the day, years ago, when he came home with the initial paperwork. He smelled of pine and honest sweat, a fine layer of sawdust catching the light in his hair like gold dust. He'd spread the papers on our worn oak kitchen table, the same table where we'd helped Kevin with his homework and paid our bills for 30 years. His hands, I remember his hands so clearly. They were a contractor's hands, strong, scarred, with lines etched into them like a roadmap of every house he'd ever framed, every roof he'd ever shingled. But when he touched my cheek, his touch was always gentle. He tapped the thickest page of the document with a paint-stained finger. "This right here," he'd said, his voice rumbling with quiet pride. "This is for your rainy days, Carol. This is my peace of mind policy for you. No matter what happens, you'll never have to worry." Worry. The word echoed in the silent, air-conditioned office. My own hand trembled just a little as I reached for the pen, Frank's peace of mind, and I was about to sign it all away. I forced a smile, one I hoped looked more confident than I felt. "It's for my son, Kevin," I explained, as if saying the words out loud would make them feel more right. "It's the down payment on his first house. You know what the market is like these days. It's just impossible for a young couple to get their foot in the door. This is the only way he and Tiffany can finally have their forever home." Forever home. The phrase felt like a prayer on my lips. It was the dream I was buying, the story I was telling myself. I wasn't just giving them money, I was giving them stability. A backyard for future grandchildren, a foundation. Frank would have understood that. He spent his whole life building foundations for other people. Mr. Davis nodded slowly, his expression carefully neutral. But his eyes held a flicker of something, pity maybe. Concern? "I understand, of course," he said, pushing the papers an inch closer to me. "And it's a wonderful gesture. Frank was just always so clear about his intentions for this fund. He saw it as your armor, my armor, and I was about to hand it over. I pictured my son, Kevin. He had Frank's smile, but not his hands. Kevin's hands were smooth, accustomed to a keyboard, not a hammer. He'd had a string of ventures ideas that were always brilliant and always just one investor away from success. First, it was an app for rating coffee shops. Then it was a subscription box for artisanal dog treats. Each one had ended the same way, with a quiet phone call to me, his voice full of disappointment, hinting at a few bills that just needed to be covered until the next big thing came along. But this was different. This wasn't a venture. This was a home. Tiffany, his wife, had sent me pictures from Zillow almost every day. She had exquisite taste, she'd told me. She wanted something with character, a place to put down roots. How could I say no to that? How could I hoard my security when they were trying to build theirs? The fear of being a selfish mother was so much greater than the fear of being a poor old woman. I uncapped the pen. The click was unnaturally loud in the quiet room. My gaze fell on my signature, where I'd have to sign my name. Beneath it, a line read, "I acknowledge that this action is irreversible." Irreversible. Like a wall coming down. Frank's face flashed in my mind again, the sawdust in his hair. "For your rainy days, Carol." Well, it wasn't raining on me yet. The sun was shining on my son's future, and as a mother, I felt it was my duty to make sure it stayed that way. "I know it's a big step," I said, my voice steadier now. "But what good is a nest egg if you don't use it to help your own flock?" Mr. Davis gave me a final, searching look, then leaned back in his leather chair. "All right then, Carol. Just sign on the indicated line." My signature, usually so steady, was a little shaky. The ink bled into the paper, a black, final stain. I pushed the documents back across the desk. It was done. I had traded my armor for their dream. I walked out of that building feeling lighter in the wallet but telling myself I was richer in purpose. The crisp afternoon air felt different, thinner. I had given my son a foundation, the biggest and most expensive one I could afford. Now, all I could do was pray he would build something on it that would last. A week later, I drove downtown to their apartment, a heavy pot of my prize-winning chili on the passenger seat, hoping to see the first bricks of that new foundation being laid. They lived in one of those renovated warehouse lofts that magazines always feature. It was impressive, I suppose, if you like living in a place that looks like a high-end furniture store before the customers arrive. The floors were polished gray concrete, the ceilings were a dizzying height of exposed pipes and ducts, and the only plant was a single, severe-looking cactus in a terracotta pot that was probably worth more than my entire living room set. It was the kind of place that was so intentionally minimalist it felt like it was trying to prove something, though I couldn't for the life of me figure out what. "Carol, you made it," Tiffany said, air kissing me near my cheek as she took the heavy grocery bag from my arms. Kevin gave me a quick, one-armed hug, his eyes already drifting back to the giant television screen that dominated one of the exposed brick walls. "I brought you some of my chili," I said, my voice sounding a little too homey for the cavernous space. "It's the recipe that won the blue ribbon at the county fair a few years back. I figured with all the stress of house hunting, you two probably haven't had much time for home-cooked meals." "Oh, Carol, bless your heart, you absolutely shouldn't have," Tiffany said with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. She carried the bag into their kitchen, which was a marvel of stainless steel and white quartz. I watched as she pulled out the hefty Tupperware container, the one I'd had since Kevin was in grade school. For a moment, she held it as if it were a strange, alien object. Then, she opened the refrigerator. It was like looking into the future. There were no mismatched leftovers, no half-empty jars of pickles. Instead, there were neat, stacked rows of identical vacuum-sealed plastic trays with sleek modern labels. "We're trying out this new meal prep service," she explained, not looking at me. "It's all organic, gluten-free, and ethically sourced. Really helps us streamline our evenings." She found a space in the very back, behind a row of pre-portioned quinoa bowls, and slid my chili into the darkness. The gesture was small, but it landed like a punch to the gut. My blue ribbon chili, made with love and simmered for 6 hours, was now hiding behind something called a power-up bowl. We sat on a low-slung leather couch that felt designed to punish you for relaxing. Kevin finally muted the TV. "So, Mom, it's so good you're here. We wanted to talk about the house. But first, I know you were wondering about the dog treat business." I hadn't been, but I nodded. "Yeah, we had to dissolve the LLC," he said with a sigh, as if he were a CEO announcing third-quarter losses. "The market is just too saturated. We had a great product, artisanal, small batch, gluten-free, but the social media algorithm just buried us. We couldn't get the traction we needed to monetize our brand." He used these words like armor, as if they could deflect any hint of personal failure. It wasn't that his idea was bad. It was the algorithm's fault. "I'm sorry to hear that, honey," I said. "Don't be." Tiffany jumped in, her eyes bright. "It was a learning experience, and it's what allowed Kevin to pivot to something he's truly passionate about. Something authentic." Kevin sat up straighter. "This house-flipping venture, Mom. This is it. It's not just about making money. It's about vision. It's about taking something old and tired and making it new. It's authentically me. I thought of my husband Frank and his hands. He took old things and made them new, too. He'd find a rotted porch on a century-old Victorian, and board by board, he would bring it back to life, honoring the original design, respecting its history. He called it restoration. Kevin was calling it a flip. The words were cousins, but they weren't in the same family. "This first house is the key," Kevin went on, his voice gaining speed. "Your investment gives us the capital to get in, do a quick modern renovation, and get out with enough profit to roll into 2 more properties. In 5 years we could be running a real development company. Your father always said that the most important tool is a solid plan," I said, testing the waters. "Exactly. And we have one," Tiffany chirped. "The plan is to use your gift to make enough money so we never have to ask for help again." The words hung in the air between us. Your gift. The $250,000 I had just signed away, the sum total of Frank's peace of mind policy for me, was a gift. A stepping stone, not a foundation for their lives but a launch pad for their business. When I left their loft an hour later, the pot of chili was still hidden in their fridge. I knew, with a certainty that made my stomach ache, that it would end up in the trash by the end of the week. I sat in my car for a long time, the engine off, the city lights blurring through my windshield. Then, I reached into my purse and pulled out the small, worn leather ledger I'd started carrying. It was an old accounting book of Frank's, the kind with neat columns and a sturdy cover. I flipped to the first clean page. With the little pen clipped to its side, I wrote down the date. In the first column, I wrote, "Annuity liquidation." In the next, I wrote the full amount. And in the wide column on the right, under the heading Notes, I wrote, "Artisanal dog treats, algorithm, authentic, quick flip, gift." As I drove home through the evening traffic, I realized Frank's peace of mind policy had taken on a new meaning. It wasn't just about protecting me from rainy days. It was about protecting his entire legacy from a storm I was just beginning to see on the horizon. As I drove away from their loft, I realized Frank's peace of mind policy had taken on a new meaning. It wasn't just about protecting me from rainy days. It was about protecting his legacy from a storm I was just beginning to see on the horizon. That storm arrived 3 days later, in the form of an ecstatic phone call from Tiffany. "We found it, Carol. The one. The agent is meeting us there in an hour. You have to come see it." Her excitement was infectious, and for a moment it pushed back the clouds of doubt. Maybe I was being too cynical. Maybe seeing the actual house, their dream made of wood and nails, would make it all feel right. When I pulled up to the address, my breath caught in my throat. It was perfect. A 1,940 craftsman bungalow nestled under the shade of a massive oak tree. It had a wide, welcoming front porch with thick, tapered columns, deep eaves, and a beautiful, sturdy-looking front door. It was the kind of house Frank had loved, the kind he'd had a special talent for restoring. He always said these homes were built by people who planned on staying. A wave of hope washed over me. This was it. This was their forever home. I met them on the sidewalk, and for the first time in a long time, we felt like a family, united in a shared dream. We walked up the stone path, and I ran my hand along the smooth, cool wood of the porch railing. It was solid oak. They didn't build them like this anymore. The realtor unlocked the door, and we stepped inside. The air was thick with the pleasant, dusty smell of old wood, beeswax, and a century of quiet living. Sunlight streamed through the original wavy glass windows, casting dancing patterns on the hardwood floors. To my right was a living room with a handsome brick fireplace and a stunning set of built-in bookshelves flanking it. The craftsmanship was breathtaking. Every joint was perfect, the wood glowing with a deep, warm patina that only comes with age. "Oh, honey," I whispered to Kevin, my heart swelling. "It's just wonderful. Your father would have adored this place." "Right," he said, grinning. "It's got so much potential." I thought that was an odd word to use for a place that was already so lovely, but I let it slide. We walked through the dining room, which had a gorgeous built-in china hutch with leaded glass doors. I could already picture them hosting Thanksgiving dinners, setting out plates on the very shelves that a family had used a generation before them. This house had a soul. It was a home waiting for a new family to love it. And then we got to the kitchen. It was dated, of course, with old tile and Formica countertops, but it was spacious and bright. "Okay, so here's our vision," Tiffany started, her voice taking on the rapid-fire cadence of a TV design show host. She stood in the doorway between the kitchen and dining room. "This whole wall comes out, obviously. We blow it all open for that open-concept living space. It's what buyers want." I blinked. "The wall with the china hutch." "Yep," she said, already moving on. "And these floors." She scuffed a trendy heel on the beautiful oak hardwood. "We'll cover them with that nice, durable gray laminate. It gives the whole place a modern, uniform look. So much better for resale." A cold knot began to form in my stomach. Resale? I thought this was their forever home. Kevin seemed to catch on to her energy, his own excitement building. "And the fireplace in the living room, we'll paint the brick white and put in a cheap electric insert. Way more cost-effective than getting the chimney inspected and cleaned." "But the brick is beautiful," I said, my voice small. "It has character." "Character doesn't move a house on Zillow, Mom," Kevin said, not unkindly, but with the weary patience of someone explaining a complex truth to a child. They moved through the rest of the house like a conquering army, pointing out every beautiful, unique feature they planned to obliterate. The original brass doorknobs would be replaced with brushed nickel levers. The charming tiled bathroom with its deep cast-iron tub would be gutted for a beige fiberglass shower stall from a big-box store. The solid wood doors would be swapped out for hollow core ones. I walked behind them in a daze, my hand trailing along the wall, touching the things they had already condemned. I felt like a ghost, haunting a house that was already being murdered. They weren't restoring a home, they were stripping an asset for parts. All of Frank's reverence for craftsmanship, for history, for the soul of a place, it meant nothing to them. It was an obstacle to profit. I must have gone silent for too long, because Kevin eventually turned to me, his brow furrowed. "You okay, Mom? You look a little pale." I struggled to find my voice. "It's just... Kevin, this house is a work of art. Your father spent his life saving houses like this, not gutting them." He let out an exasperated sigh and slapped his hand against a solid plaster wall. The sound echoed in the quiet room. "Look, I get it, it's old. But that's the point. It has good bones for a quick gut. That's what matters to an investor. You find a solid frame, and you strip away all the dated junk. Good bones for a quick gut." The phrase bounced around my skull. It was a phrase Frank had used, but with a completely different meaning. For him, good bones were the start of a loving restoration. For his son, they were just the prerequisite for a swift and profitable demolition. Tiffany must have seen the horror on my face, because she put a placating hand on my arm. "Oh, Carol, I know it seems like a lot, but you have to think of it logically. It's a starter investment, not a sentimental museum. A museum. That's what my values were to her. Dusty, old, and irrelevant." The ride home was a blur. I didn't cry. The shock was too deep for tears. The warm, hopeful woman who had arrived at that beautiful craftsman house an hour ago was gone. In her place was someone I didn't recognize, someone cold and clear and sharp as glass. That evening, I sat at my oak kitchen table and opened Frank's ledger. I turned to a new page and wrote down the date. In the notes column, I wrote the address of the house. And beneath it, I wrote the words that would become my new foundation. Good bones for a quick gut. Starter investment. Not a sentimental museum. The storm was no longer on the horizon. I was in the eye of it. The storm was no longer on the horizon. I was in the eye of it, and when you're in the middle of a hurricane, you don't run. You find the strongest part of the foundation and you hold on. Or, if you're like my husband Frank, you build a new one. Over the next few days, I was quiet. I made a few phone calls, read a few articles online, and spent a lot of time with Frank's old ledger. I wasn't just a widow grieving her husband anymore. I was a student studying her master. Then came the call from Tiffany. Her voice was brittle with impatience. "Carol, we need you to come over and sign the gift letter. The mortgage broker is breathing down my neck. We can't move forward until it's done." I found them at their loft, surrounded by half-packed boxes and a sea of paint swatches fanned out across the concrete floor. They had already moved on from the beautiful craftsman house. They were living in the theoretical profits of its destruction. Kevin was scrolling through a website for stainless steel appliances on his laptop, while Tiffany was holding up two nearly identical shades of gray paint on her phone. "Which one says, high-end modern farmhouse to you?" she asked me without looking up. "Alpaca gray or mindful grage?" "They look the same to me, dear," I said. She sighed dramatically. "That's the point. It's about the nuance." There was no nuance in their plans, only a bulldozer. Finally, Tiffany seemed to remember why I was there. She breezed over to a pile of mail on their kitchen island and pulled out a few sheets of paper stapled together. She slid them across the quartz countertop towards me, along with a cheap ballpoint pen from a local bank. "Here it is," she said, already turning her attention back to her phone. "Our lawyer said since this is a gift for the mortgage, the bank needs a formal letter from you stating that the money is a gift and there's no expectation of repayment. It's just a formality. Just sign at the bottom. Just a formality." The phrase hung in the air, light and meaningless to her, but heavy as an anchor to me. I thought of Frank, who used to say that the only formalities were handshakes and thank you notes. Everything else, especially anything on paper, was a contract. "There's no such thing as just a formality when a signature is involved, Carol," he'd tell me, tapping a set of blueprints. "The words on the page are the only things that last when memories get fuzzy." I picked up the document. The paper was flimsy, a cheap copy. Kevin and Tiffany weren't paying attention to me at all. He'd found a refrigerator with a built-in tablet and was trying to justify the expense. She was now looking up subway tile backsplashes. To them, I was a necessary errand, a box to be checked before they could get back to the exciting part. They didn't see me. They saw a signature. So I sat down at their kitchen island and I read. I read every single word. I read the jargon and the legal disclaimers, the dense paragraphs of boilerplate text. My eyes didn't skim, they absorbed. I was no lawyer, but I was the widow of a man who had lived and died by the fine print. I knew that in between the lines about fund transfers and federal regulations, the truth of a deal was always hiding in plain sight. And there it was, in Section 3, subsection B. A short, simple sentence. The funds provided are an unconditional gift, with no conditions, expectations, or terms of repayment, verbal or written. Unconditional. That was the word that mattered, but my gift had always been conditional. The condition, the one I had stated out loud and they had agreed to, was that this money was for their forever home. They were the ones who had changed the terms when they decided it was a starter investment. My heart wasn't pounding. My hands weren't shaking. For the first time in months, a strange, cold calm settled over me. I reached into my own purse and took out my own pen. It was a simple black felt tip, the kind I used for grocery lists, but it felt solid and real in my hand. Frank's voice was in my ear, a low, steady murmur. "Read the page, Carol. Then make the page read right." While they debated the merits of brushed brass versus matte black cabinet pulls, I placed the tip of my pen in the margin right next to subsection B. In my neatest, clearest cursive, the same cursive I had used to grade home economics papers for 30 years, I made a small handwritten amendment. I drew a little asterisk and wrote, "Per our verbal agreement on February 15th, these funds are provided exclusively for the purchase of a primary residence, not for commercial or investment use." It was a simple sentence, an innocent-looking clarification. To a pair of careless, overconfident children in a hurry, it would look like nothing at all. A little note from their slightly dotty old mom, but I knew, from listening to Frank argue with suppliers for decades, that a handwritten note on a signed contract was called an addendum, and it was just as binding as the typed words around it. Then, I turned to the last page and signed my name on the signature line. My hand didn't waver. The signature was strong, confident. It was the signature of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. "All set," I said, pushing the papers back towards Tiffany. She scooped them up without a glance. "Great. Thanks, Carol. I'll scan this over to the broker right now. Oh, Kevin, look at this waterfall island." She put the document, my declaration of war, into a folder, and the formality was over. They had their gift letter, and I had my leverage. They had handed me the rule book, assuming I didn't know how to read it. They were about to learn, in the most public way possible, that I knew the game far better than they did. The housewarming party was the final chapter in my education. I drove home from that beautiful craftsman house, the one they had already stripped of its dignity in their minds, with Tiffany's words echoing in my ears. Primary investor, seed capital, flip. The clinical, bloodless language of a business transaction. There were no tears. The shock and the hurt from the past few weeks had been so intense, they had finally burned themselves out. All that was left behind was a strange, quiet calm, as hard and clear as diamond. The emotional part of me, the soft, yielding mother who made excuses and hoped for the best, had finally left the building. The part of me that was left was Frank's wife, and Frank's wife knew how to read a contract. My own house was quiet when I got home. The silence felt different tonight. It wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. It was the silence of a workshop after the plans have been finalized and the tools have been laid out for the morning's work. I didn't turn on the television or busy my hands with chores. Instead, I walked to the kitchen and put the kettle on, moving with a deliberate slowness I hadn't felt in years. I opened the cupboard and chose my favorite tea, the strong English breakfast blend Frank and I used to drink together every morning. Then, I went to the little desk in the corner of the kitchen where I kept my cookbooks and bills, and I retrieved the worn leather ledger. I brought it back to the oak table, the one Frank had built for me as a wedding present, and sat down. For a moment, I just ran my hand over the cover. It was soft from years of use, and I could still smell the faint, clean scent of sawdust and wood varnish that clung to its pages. This ledger had been Frank's brain, the place he kept track of every job, every invoice, every promise made and kept. Now, it was mine. I took a sip of my hot tea and opened the book. The pages were no longer empty. They were filled with my neat, steady cursive. This wasn't a diary of my feelings. It was a logbook of facts, an accounting of a debt that had nothing to do with money. My friend Sharon, who'd spent 30 years as a top paralegal for a corporate law firm, had been the one to give me the idea. After I'd first told her about my plan to liquidate the annuity, she'd listened patiently, her sharp eyes missing nothing. She hadn't told me not to do it, she knew. A mother's heart is a stubborn thing. Instead, she'd given me a piece of advice that had sounded strange at the time. "Write everything down, Carol," she'd said. "Dates, times, exact quotes. When people show you who they are, your job is to take good notes. Treat it like a deposition." At first, it had just been a way to process my own hurt. But now, looking at the pages, I saw what Sharon had seen from the beginning. It wasn't a diary. It was evidence. My finger traced the first entry. The date I'd met with Mr. Davis, the full amount of the annuity. In the notes column, Frank's peace of mind policy. For their forever home. I turned the page, the date of my visit to their loft. In the notes column, chili rejected for meal prep service. Failed. Artisanal dog treats venture, blamed on algorithm. Plan is a quick flip. Referred to annuity as my gift. Another page, the date we'd visited the Craftsman house. The notes column was longer for that day. It was a list of casualties. Original hardwood floors to be replaced with gray laminate. Brick fireplace to be painted white. Built-in china hutch to be demolished for open concept. And at the bottom, I had underlined the two quotes that had stopped my heart. Good bones for a quick gut. And a starter investment, not a sentimental museum. I turned to the most recent entry, the one I'd made after signing the gift letter. Just a formality. Signed gift letter with handwritten addendum in margin. Per our verbal agreement on February 15th, these funds are provided exclusively for the purchase of a primary residence, not for commercial or investment use. K&T did not read the document before I signed or after. Tonight, I would make the final entry before the work began. I uncapped my pen. I wrote today's date. I wrote the location. The housewarming, investor party. And then, I wrote the quote, making sure to get it exactly right. Thank you to Kevin's mom, our primary investor, for providing the seed capital to make this flip happen. I read it all back, from the beginning. It was a clear, undeniable story of misrepresentation and manipulation. The slow burn of disrespect had created a perfect, documented case of deceit. My hope had been that I was giving my son a foundation. Instead, they had handed me a lawsuit on a silver platter. I closed the ledger. The time for taking notes was over. Sharon had told me what to look for, what they would need to do to legally default on the terms of the gift, even with my addendum. By publicly declaring the house a flip and me an investor, they had done it. They had sprung the trap on themselves. I picked up my phone from the counter. My hand was perfectly steady as I found Sharon's number in my contacts and pressed the call button. She answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and alert, even late at night. "Sharon? It's Carol. I was wondering when you'd call," she said. "How was the party?" I looked at the closed ledger on the table, my plan, my armor, my husband's final gift to me. "They did exactly what you said they would," I said, my voice low and clear. "It's time. It's time," I had said, and after I hung up the phone, a profound sense of peace settled over me. The next morning, Sharon filed the necessary paperwork. The trap was set. All I had to do was wait for them to walk into it. I wasn't there for the closing, of course. Sharon had insisted it was better that way, cleaner. My presence would have turned it into a family drama, and this was no longer about family. This was business. But she got a full, detailed account from her contact at the title company, and I've pictured the scene in my mind 1,000 times since. I can see it as clearly as if I had been a fly on the wall. I imagine them arriving at the sterile conference room of the title company, buzzing with a giddy, triumphant energy. Tiffany would be wearing something expensive and white, as if she were a bride marrying a business deal. Kevin, in a blazer that was probably new, would be trying to look like the successful real estate developer he already believed himself to be. They were at the finish line, about to be handed the keys to their future, a future built on the rubble of my own. The escrow officer, a patient, methodical man named Mr. Chen, would have greeted them with a professional smile and gestured to the 2 chairs opposite him. In the center of the large table, a formidable stack of documents would be waiting the final boss of their home-buying journey. They wouldn't have been intimidated, they would have been thrilled. I can almost hear Tiffany's light, tinkling laugh. I can see her pulling out her phone to take a selfie, the stack of papers in the background, with a caption already composed in her head. "Closing day. Building our empire, one dream home at a time. Number power couple, number real estate investing." Mr. Chen would begin the process, his voice a calm monotone as he slid the first document across the table. "This is the mortgage note. Please sign here, initial here." They would sign with a flourish. Page after page, the ritual would continue, the deed of trust, the closing disclosure, the truth in lending statement. A mountain of paper filled with words that could change your life, and they would see none of them. To them, it wasn't a series of binding legal promises. It was a tedious formality, a final hurdle before they could get the keys and call the demolition crew they'd already put on standby for Monday morning. I can picture Kevin leaning back in his chair, talking loudly about their plans. "Yeah, the first thing to go is the kitchen. We're talking a full gut. Should add at least $50,000 to the appraisal value right off the bat." Tiffany would chime in, talking about the profit margins, the comps in the neighborhood, the potential for a quick 6-month flip. They wouldn't just be talking in front of Mr. Chen. They would be performing for him, 2 brilliant young entrepreneurs making their mark on the world, oblivious that every word they spoke was just tightening the noose. An hour would pass. The stack of signed papers would grow taller, the stack of unsigned ones smaller. Finally, Mr. Chen would slide the last few pages across the table. The final settlement statement. The transfer of title. They were moments away. Kevin would likely be tapping his pen on the table, a picture of restless ambition. Tiffany would be reapplying her lipstick, getting ready for the triumphant photo with the sold sign. And then, the moment of impact. Mr. Chen would slide the final signature page back to his side of the desk. He would pause. His professional smile would fade, replaced by a look of concentration as he glanced at his computer monitor. He'd type a few keys, and his brow would furrow slightly. "Just a moment," he would say, his calm tone suddenly holding a new weight. He'd open a separate folder on his desk and pull out a single sheet of paper, a printout of an email. "What's wrong?" Kevin would ask, his bravado wavering for the first time. Mr. Chen would clear his throat, a dry, official sound. "I'm afraid we have a small issue. I have a notice here that just came through from the legal counsel representing the gifter, Mrs. Carol Fletcher." The air in the room would instantly change. The giddiness would evaporate, replaced by a tense, confused silence. "A notice? What kind of notice?" Tiffany would ask, her voice sharp. Mr. Chen would put on a pair of reading glasses, giving his next words an undeniable air of authority. "It's a notice of default and a formal recall of funds." He would pick up a copy of the gift letter, the one I had signed in their loft. It references the gift letter you submitted, specifically a handwritten addendum made by Mrs. Fletcher on the date of signing. He'd read the words I had so carefully written in the margin. Per our verbal agreement on February 15th, these funds are provided exclusively for the purchase of a primary residence, not for commercial or investment use. Kevin would scoff. That was just a note. It doesn't mean anything. I'm afraid it does, Mr. Chen would say, his voice flat and final. According to this notice, the Gifters Council has provided evidence including social media posts and a sworn statement from a guest at a party you hosted that you have consistently and publicly misrepresented the intended use of this property as a commercial flip. This constitutes a breach of the conditional terms of the gift. Tiffany's perfectly made-up face would crumble. Breach? It was a gift. She can't just take it back. According to the demand for payment clause, which is standard in these letters and was activated by the breach of the handwritten addendum. Mr. Chen would continue, unflustered. The gifter has exercised her legal right to recall the funds prior to the close of escrow. The wire transfer from her account has been stopped and reversed. I'm afraid there are no funds to purchase the property. We cannot complete the closing. Silence. The deafening, soul-crushing silence of a dream imploding. I picture them just sitting there, staring. The pen in Kevin's hand would be frozen over the dotted line he would never get to sign. The selfie on Tiffany's phone would suddenly look like a picture from a different lifetime. This is a mistake, Kevin would finally stammer, his voice thin. A misunderstanding. Get my mom on the phone, right now. Mr. Chen would slowly begin to gather the massive pile of now useless documents, his movements neat and final. I'm sorry, he'd say, his voice holding not a trace of pity, only professional finality. My instructions are quite clear. The deal is off. There's nothing more to sign. They had signed their names 100 times that afternoon, full of arrogance and greed, but the only signature that had mattered in the end was mine. My signature had ended the deal, and I imagined them sitting there in that sterile conference room, surrounded by the ghosts of their own greed, their own signatures now worthless. Mr. Chen would have given them a final, polite but firm nod before gathering the files and leaving them alone. Alone with the silence, the useless pile of papers, and the sudden, crushing weight of their own failure. The walk out of that building must have felt like a mile. The professional smiles from the receptionists that had seemed so welcoming on the way in would now feel mocking. The bright, indifferent afternoon sun would have felt like an accusation. Every person they passed on the street, laughing or talking on their phone, would have seemed like a citizen of a world they no longer belonged to, the world of people who had their lives together. Then, the car. A late-model leased SUV that probably cost more per month than my own mortgage payment ever did. It was likely the one place they felt powerful, insulated from the world by tinted glass and the smell of new leather. But on that day, I picture it feeling like a trap, a pressure cooker on wheels. The silence inside would have been thick, suffocating, broken only by the sound of Tiffany's ragged breathing as she tried not to let a single tear ruin her expensive makeup. And then, the phones would have started. First, their realtor, his number flashing on the car's dashboard display. I can see Kevin's trembling finger accepting the call, putting it on speaker. The man's voice, once so chummy and conspiratorial, would have been a furious torrent of words. Breach of contract. Wasted time. My commission. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. Click. Then, the mortgage broker, his voice a cold, clipped reprimand. Unprofessional, highly irregular. We're pulling your pre-approval. Effective immediately. Click. The fragile, imaginary empire they had been building for months had just been wiped off the map in a series of 2-minute phone calls. The real world, the one with consequences, had finally caught up with them. With the outside world's condemnations ringing in their ears, they would have finally turned on each other. How could you let this happen? Tiffany would have hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. She's your mother. You were supposed to have her under control. Me, Kevin would snap back, his face pale and blotchy. You were the one who couldn't keep her mouth shut. Primary investor. Seed capital. Did you have to announce it to the entire world? You handed her the ammunition. I was branding our success, she'd cry, her voice cracking. Something you know nothing about. If your artisanal dog treats had worked, we wouldn't even be in this mess. The power couple facade, so carefully constructed for social media, would have shattered into a million tiny, jagged pieces. They weren't partners. They were just two people who had been using the same ATM, and it had just gone permanently out of service. After the anger, after the blame, there would be only one thing left: sheer, bottomless panic. The realization that the demolition crew was scheduled for Monday. The deposit for the new appliances was non-refundable. The first payment on the bridge loan they'd taken out was due next week. The walls of their own financial irresponsibility were closing in. And in that moment of pure desperation, my son would have done what he had always done when the walls closed in. He would have reached for his phone to call his mother. I can picture it perfectly. The fumbling of his fingers, the last desperate glimmer of hope in his eyes that this was all a terrible misunderstanding, a fit of pique that I would get over once he apologized. He would press the call button, his last resort, his lifelong safety net. He would put the phone to his ear, ready to deploy the apologetic little boy voice that had always worked on me before. But he wouldn't hear my voice. He wouldn't get the chance. Instead, a new recording would play my voice, but not the one he knew. It was calm, clear, and utterly detached. It was the voice of a woman who was no longer his mother, but simply an entity he used to do business with. "You have reached Carol Fletcher," the message would say. "I am unavailable to take your call. If this is a personal matter, please feel free to leave a message after the tone. If this is Kevin or Tiffany, please direct all future correspondence to my attorney, Sharon Peters, at 555-212-9874. She will be handling all of my affairs from this point forward. Thank you." Beep. The silence that followed that beep would have been more profound than any that had come before. It was the silence of a door not just being closed, but being bolted, barred, and sealed shut from the other side. The word attorney would hang in the air between them. A cold, hard finality. This wasn't an emotional outburst. This wasn't a tantrum. This was a strategy. This was a legal wall so high they would never be able to climb it. They hadn't just been cut off. They had been, in the precise, clinical language of the business world they so admired, divested. For years, whenever there was a scary silence in their lives, a gap between paychecks, an unexpected bill, a failed venture, I had rushed in to fill it with my money, with my reassurance. Now, for the first time, they would have to sit in a quiet of their own making, and I suspected it was going to be very, very loud. For years, I had filled their silences with my money. Now, for the first time, they would have to sit in a quiet of their own making. And as the weeks turned into a month, I came to understand that the quiet I had left them with wasn't empty. It was filled with the loud, clamoring noise of consequences. I didn't hear from them directly, of course. The legal wall Sharon and I had built was high and solid, but in a town this size, news travels in drips and whispers through concerned friends and casual acquaintances. While my own days settled into a peaceful, predictable rhythm, mornings spent in my garden, coffee with Sharon on Tuesdays, the simple joy of reading a book without waiting for a crisis, call the story of their lives was one of chaotic descent. The first whisper came from a friend who lived in their downtown building. She mentioned seeing a moving truck, not a big professional one, but a rented U-Haul, parked outside their loft. Their trendy, minimalist palace of exposed brick and concrete floors was being emptied. They were downsizing, drastically. A few weeks later, another piece of the story emerged. A neighbor of mine came back from a shopping trip, her face a mixture of pity and gossip. "Carol, you'll never guess who I saw working the checkout at Home Goods," she said. "Tiffany, your daughter-in-law." I could picture it perfectly. Tiffany, who had curated a life that looked like an Instagram feed, now wearing a red smock with a plastic name tag. The hands that had scrolled through designer websites were now scanning throw pillows and Ray Dunn pottery for strangers. I imagined her forcing a customer service smile, her eyes holding the brittle, hollow look of someone performing a role they despised. The lifestyle brand she had been so proud of had been liquidated, replaced by an hourly wage and a mandatory lunch break. There was a certain brutal irony in it. She had loved the idea of a modern farmhouse aesthetic. Now she was selling it to other people, one discounted item at a time. The news about Kevin came from a man in my husband's old poker group who still ran his own plumbing business. "Saw your boy on a job site the other day," he'd told me over the fence. "Crew out of Centerville. They're framing those new condos out by the highway. He was hauling lumber, looked like hard work. This news landed differently. Tiffany's fate felt like simple cause and effect, the predictable outcome of a life built on vanity. But Kevin hauling lumber, my son, whose hands had always been so smooth, whose greatest physical exertion was carrying a laptop to a coffee shop. He was working in the world that had been his father's kingdom. The world of early mornings, of sawdust and sweat, of building things meant to stand against the weather. I didn't know how to feel. Was this his punishment? Or was it, in some strange way, his salvation? Frank had always tried to teach him the dignity of a trade, the simple, profound satisfaction of being tired at the end of a day because you had made something real. Kevin had always dismissed it as old-fashioned, as beneath him. Now, with no other options, he was living his father's life. The phone call he couldn't make to me had forced him to answer to a foreman instead. 2 more months passed. The whispers faded. The autumn leaves turned and fell. My garden was put to bed for the winter. The silence from their end was total, and I found I did not miss the noise. Then, one Tuesday evening, I was clearing out old messages on my phone. There was one from an unknown number that had come in the day before. I almost deleted it, assuming it was a spam call, but something made me pause, my thumb hovering over the screen. I pressed play. There was a long silence at first, filled with the sounds of the outdoors, the wind, a distant truck, the faint beep of machinery in reverse. Then, a voice, hesitant and raspy, a voice I almost didn't recognize. "Mom, it's Kevin." He paused again, and I could hear him take a deep, shaky breath. "You probably won't even get this," he said, his voice quiet. And I get it. I'm not calling to ask for anything. Sharon made that very clear. I'm on my lunch break. I'm sitting here on a pile of drywall and it made me think of Dad. He let out a short, bitter little laugh. Funny, right? I spent my whole life trying not to be him. Now I'm wearing his brand of work boots. They hurt your feet, by the way. A lot. Another silence. "The work is hard," he continued, his voice softer now. "My hands are a mess. I'm tired all the time. And I know this is going to sound crazy, but at the end of the day you can stand back and see it, a wall that wasn't there before. A roof. You can see what you did. I get it now, Mom, what Dad was always talking about building something real. It's a good feeling." I stood in my quiet kitchen, my hand pressed to my mouth. "Anyway," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I know I messed everything up. It wasn't about the money. I was a jerk. I didn't respect you. I didn't respect him. I'm so sorry." The message ended. There was no request, no hidden plea. It was just a confession, an admission. The hard lesson, it seemed, was beginning to take root. The phone call he couldn't make for months had finally forced him to have a different kind of conversation, one with himself, and it sounded like, for the very first time, he was starting to listen. I saved the voicemail, a small, cracked seed of hope that I tucked away in a quiet corner of my heart, but I didn't call him back. His apology wasn't an invitation, and I knew it. It was a landmark on a long road he had to walk by himself. My job as his mother had been to give him a map. For years, I had been trying to carry him down the road instead. My greatest act of love, I finally understood, was letting him go, letting his own 2 feet get tired and calloused and strong. His journey was finally his own, and I had my own to walk, too. A few weeks later, on a crisp autumn morning, I found myself driving through the tree-lined streets of the historic district, pulling up to a familiar curb. It was the Craftsman House, the beautiful, sturdy home with the wide front porch that had been the stage for my greatest heartbreak. The sold sign out front had been replaced by a new, much larger one. It read, "The Fletcher Restoration Project, a partnership with Northwood Technical College." After the deal fell through, the house had gone back on the market. I bought it. The money that Frank had saved for my future, the money that was supposed to be the seed capital for their quick and soulless flip, was now being used for its true purpose. It was funding a foundation. I got out of my car, not with the trepidation I'd felt before, but with a sense of purpose that warmed me from the inside out. The air, instead of being filled with the roar of demolition, was alive with the sounds of careful creation, the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of a hammer, the gentle rasp of a handsaw against wood, the cheerful chatter of young voices. On the porch, a group of young men and women, all in their late teens and early 20s, were gathered around an older, experienced carpenter who was demonstrating how to properly restore the original porch railings. They were the first recipients of the Frank and Carol Grant, a scholarship fund I had established with the annuity money to give apprentices a chance to learn a skilled trade. I wasn't just the benefactor, writing checks from a distance. I was here. I walked up the stone path, wearing a pair of old jeans and one of Frank's faded flannel shirts. Around my waist was his old leather tool belt. It was heavy and smelled faintly of him. It felt like an embrace. "Morning, Carol," the lead carpenter called out, "just showing them how to save this original baluster. It's got a bit of rot, but the core is solid oak. A real crime to throw it out." "Never throw out good oak, Marco," I said, smiling. "Frank always said it has more character than any of us." A young woman with bright pink hair and a look of intense concentration was struggling to replicate a delicate piece of trim for one of the windows. "I just can't get this curve right, Mrs. Fletcher," she said, frustrated. "It keeps splitting." I picked up a piece of scrap wood. "Your father taught me a trick for this," I told her, my voice softer than I expected. "You have to go with the grain, not against it. Feel the wood. It'll tell you which way it wants to bend." I showed her how to angle the saw, how to apply gentle, steady pressure. She tried it, and the wood curved perfectly. Her face broke into a grin of pure, unadulterated pride. In that one small moment, in that one honest smile, I felt more gratitude than I had in 3 years of writing checks for Kevin and Tiffany. I spent the rest of the day there, not as an investor, but as a part of the crew. I brought them coffee and donuts. I helped them measure. I helped them sand. I told them stories about Frank, about the houses he'd built, about the pride he took in a job well done. I was passing on his legacy, not through a bank transfer, but through his stories, through his values. I realized I hadn't lost Frank's gift at all. I had finally figured out how to truly invest it. I had thought my legacy was my son. I'd poured everything I had into him, hoping he would become the monument to my life as a mother. But a legacy isn't something you can build for someone else. It's the house you build for your own soul. By tearing down the rotten framework of my relationship with Kevin, I had cleared the ground to build something new, something that would last, something that would provide a foundation for others. Maybe one day Kevin will finish walking his own long road. Maybe he'll keep building things, and maybe the man he becomes will be someone his father would have been proud of. I hope so. But his future is no longer my project. My project is here. It's this house. It's these kids. It's the legacy of a good man's love, finally being used to build something true. Love, I've learned, isn't about giving people what they want. It's about giving them what they need to grow. And true wealth isn't measured by the balance in your bank account, but by the strength of the character you build. So let me ask you, if you had the chance to tear everything down just to build something new and true in its place, would you have the courage to pick up the hammer? If this story resonated with you, I would be honored to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And please, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about finding the strength to build your own life.